Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, March 12th, 2017. It's the Gold Goats and Guns morning show, and I am Tom Luongo. Bear with a second while I actually get this thing set up properly, and then we'll get started. Want to talk about the big news out of Russia this morning, which is looks like the deal is getting finalized between Rosneft and state-controlled investment house Huarong Asset Management. There's a lot to this deal. This goes all the way back to last year's sale of a 19.6% stake in Rosneft that was bought by both Glencore, commodity trader Glencore, and the Qatari Investment Authority, QIA. Now, that happened in April or so of last year, and then if you remember, after that, the Saudi Arabians put controls on the let me just pop the chat out real quick so I can make sure that I can see y'all if you guys have anything to say. Good morning, NetDrag. How are you? So the Saudi Arabians then boycotted and tried to isolate diplomatically and financially Qatar over quote-unquote funding terrorists, which of course the Qataris were doing, but so were the Saudi Arabians and everybody else. What a shock that friends of Hillary Clinton accuse people of doing what they're doing. What a shock. All right, so but regardless of Hillary and her mendacity, so this deal is very, very important for a variety of reasons. One, it was important that the Russians be able to go to the investment community and secure a deal in European markets. It's very important at the time as a kind of way to defy the sanctions and let the market know that they had marketable assets, and to help Putin prove to the world that there was a market for Russia's assets in the face of sanctions and everything else, in the face of financial pressure from the United States, financial and diplomatic pressure from the United States. Moreover, when you really stop to look at it, it was also very important for Qatar to be involved in this deal, because it was the first inkling that we had that Qatar was going to break with the coalition to destroy Syria. Now, this all ties back into Syria. So now think about how this all works. The Saudis and the Israelis and the Jordanians and the Americans and the Brits and everybody and the Turks all wanted, or all in some way, part of the coalition to destroy Syria by creating ISIS and backing various sects of Al-Qaeda in Syria. That this was their plan to destroy the Assad regime and then and atomize the country, create a failed state, which the Russians said no to. And then in 2015, when the Russians moved in to say, no, we're going to end this process, all hell broke loose. Okay, so now Qatar was a part of this by backing Hamas and other groups in Idlib, in and around Idlib, and into Lebanon. Not into Lebanon, sorry, but they weren't backing. Yeah, well, they have a very close relationship with Hamas. But but Qatar was backing one side of it, effectively Al-Qaeda, sorry. And there's so many moving parts of this, you kind of forget sometimes what's actually going on. And really the Saudis and the Americans were kind of backing ISIS, and in that respect. And those are kind of, in broad strokes, the battle lines, the way the factions were laying themselves out. So Qatar and the Turks backing Al-Qaeda, factions like Harar al-Sham and Jayesh al-Sham, and every week they change their name in order to obfuscate and allow the Western press to say, no, they're really just moderate terrorists. They're not really trying to take over the world or anything, or destroy anybody's livelihoods. They're really the good guys, which is all bullshit. Okay, so but as the Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah's support of the Syrian government stabilized the Assad government and stabilized and reversed the territory losses of the Syrian government, Qatar started to get cold feet. They started to realize that the Russians were going to win, right? That Assad was not going to be removed from power, and they needed an exit strategy. Now, Qatar and Iran share access to the North Pars gas fields in the Persian Gulf. So there's a natural desire to get that stuff, to get those fields developed, which is part of the reason why the Saudis went in and blockaded all the ports and tried to shut down Qatar's ability to export LNG, liquefied natural gas, which the Qataris are the biggest exporters of LNG in the world. It's where their wealth comes from. So if Qatar wanted to switch sides, how would you make that clear to those on the other side? Well, the first thing you do is you reach out to Russia and say, okay, Vlad, Mr. Putin, what can we do? And Mr. Putin says, well, we have this big, huge 20% stake in Rosneft that we'd like somebody to buy. If you would be so kind. Now, on top of, so Qatar got involved. They bought some like 4.5% of Rosneft. Glencore bought like 0.5%, the commodity trading firm out of the UK. But the rest of it was really a very complicated and shady deal whereby the Russian and Italian banks financed the rest. So really, the Russians only sold about 5% of Rosneft. The other 14% or so was actually owned by a consortium of Russian banks, and Intesa Sanpaolo, which is a major Italian bank. And it's also a major Italian bank that's in trouble. So let's start connecting all the dots, shall we? Qatar and Glencore own a certain stake, a small stake in Rosneft, the Russians' largest oil company. Gazprom is the the natural gas company. They have an oil division, but that Rosneft is the largest oil producer by far, and its CEO Igor Sechin is one of Putin's closest allies. A consortium of Russian banks and a major Italian bank have loans against or finance the rest of the deal, right? And Qatar, literally less than 60 days later, gets attacked by Saudi Arabia and put on a path to regime change, which doesn't come about. And why? Because they made friends with the Russians, and they started making friends and overtures with Iran. They cut a lot of deals with Iran, which I don't want to go into right now. You look this stuff up. In September, now fast forward to September, when the first inkling of what this deal actually meant was all about. And I'm going to read this from a Market Watch article from September. Glencore and Qatar have agreed to sell the bulk of their 20% stake in Russian state-controlled oil company PAO Rosneft to a Chinese energy company in a deal worth about $9 billion. Now, originally, they spent $11.3 billion on the 20% stake. They're now going to sell a portion of that stake. The deal, announced by Swiss commodity miner and trader Glencore, so yeah, that's right, Glencore is Swiss, gives CEFC, China Energy Company, a 14.2% stake in Rosneft, deepening a growing economic relationship between China and Russia. It also adds a new twist on the complex arrangement to raise money for a cash-strapped Vladimir Putin, blah, blah, blah. That's all Market Watch's horseshit. The Russians are not cash-strapped. They have $450 billion in foreign exchange reserves. And less than the Russians are not cash-strapped. What's important to understand is that Glencore and Rosneft are not selling anything. They're retaining their stakes in this deal. What the Chinese are buying is the portion of the stake financed by the Russian banks and Intesa Sanpaolo. Now, this deal gets finalized a week or so after the Italian elections. Now you should see what I'm getting at. Intesa Sanpaolo has a sincere non-performing loan portfolio. They have a bad balance sheet. They're not as bad as some Italian banks, but they're in trouble just like the rest of the Italian banking system is in trouble. So here's the Chinese coming in and making a very strong overture and making a very strong case and a strong move now to liquidity inject into Intesa Sanpaolo and take this loan off their books and shore up their balance sheet and have this deal cut now. This deal was always supposed to finish up. Part of it was finalized in December, and the rest of it is now being finalized now. And that's what this is truly all about. So when you see the headline that Chinese state-controlled. The China is now buying a stake in Rosneft. This was always the plan. But in order to get this done, it was necessary to involve the Italians at some point. And this is all really, really good for the. This is really all very good for relationships, building relationships between all of these key geopolitical players that are trying to fight the U.S., UK, EU leadership, right? And with a new Eurosceptic government likely to happen here in Italy, the timing of the announcement of the completion of this deal just screams. It just screams, here, Matteo Salvini, leader of the league, we have your back. We're going to help you attempt to get through this as best as possible by shoring up one of the biggest potential problems for you in the long term, because the goal was always to sell this stake to China anyway, because CEFC and Rosneft have a production deal. So why wouldn't they want a cut of Rosneft's profits? In a sense, investing in the company that's going to supply them oil for the next minimum 5 years. They've got a deal that expires in 2023. So just find this really fascinating that's part of the situation, that these things always seem to work themselves out in a particular way. I think it's really quite funny. So, yeah. So Russian intervention into Syria primarily driven by a desire to increase foreign investment to subvert sanctions, or primarily humanitarian in nature with a positive side effect of investment, asked by user DTF. No, neither. Partially, but neither. Russia was protecting their own interests. The main reason for going into Syria is, one, they need to be able to protect their access to the Bosphorus and Dardanelles by having an air base and hopefully a naval base outside of the Black Sea. It's always just geostrategically very important for Russia. They secured Sevastopol by reunifying with Crimea in 2014. Now there's that, and so part of the reason why Syria is so important for that perspective. The second main reason was to make sure that there was not a failed state on the Russian southern flank, or you can argue about the word underbelly, but because it's not really, but it's close enough. From Vladimir Putin's point of view, it is. Because with Turkey being fundamentally unstable and a porous border and everything else, watching allies of Turkey walk back and forth across the quote-unquote Syrian border to then start putting pressure on southern Russia on the eastern part of the Black Sea, and be able to help and to support moving into places like Armenia and/or Azerbaijan. This is important. And Georgia, this is all very important because this opens up the Caucasus. So those were the main reasons. The use of Rosneft as a means by which to secure geopolitical goals, well, that's just one of those pieces that Putin has on the board in order to play the game, as it were. So, and then as far as the humanitarian aspect of it, that's all depends on your read on Putin. I tend to think of Putin much more sympathetically than most Americans do, and certainly anybody involved in U.S. media. I'm not saying that Putin's not willing to do exactly what he needs to do, and is not above extreme levels of realpolitik, i.e., yeah, okay, whatever. You can insert what level of violence you think the man employs to your own liking, salt that analysis to taste. But I think that the main point about Putin is that he is a Russian nationalist. And so he's going to make moves that are purely in Russia's best interests. And intervention in Syria is one of them. And there would be no chance for peace in the Middle East. There would be no chance for a de-escalated and prosperous Central Asia. And there would be no chance of a successful Chinese Belt and Road Initiative linking, Shanghai and London and Jakarta, right? With Syria and Afghanistan being a mess. and in the hands of the worst people. And so that's why the U.S. is very strongly pushing, why the neocons and in charge of foreign policy in the United States are pushing both Syria and Afghanistan so hard. And I do fundamentally believe that Trump understands this dynamic and is trying to reverse it as best he can. And it's not an easy thing to reverse, because we are talking about reversing over 70 years of U.S. foreign policy, U.S. policy inertia, and all of that. So not something that you're just going to tear down overnight. As much as we would like that to happen, it's not going to happen. As much as we would like him to just walk in and tell Secretary Mattis, okay, start pulling the troops out of eastern Syria. We're not occupying it. We're not creating a greater Kurdistan. I wouldn't even actually recommend that at this point. And the main reason is that you still have to show strength to people, to Iran and to Russia. Otherwise, they will take advantage of it in the worst way. No matter what kind of brave face or what kind of a friendly face they put on their own personal machinations. Okay, so let's see. We got anybody else? If you guys have any other questions about this, put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to talk about it. My name's Tom Luongo. The name of the stream is Gold, Goats, and Guns. The name of the blog is Gold, Goats, and Guns. And the name of the Patreon service is Gold, Goats, and Guns. You can find me here a few times a week. Please subscribe to the channel. Please give a like so that more people can find the stream. Actually, we're doing pretty well now that I've started doing this on a semi-regular basis. Subscribers are coming in pretty quickly, so I'm really quite pleased about that. Let's see. What else do we want to talk about this morning? A couple other things. The other thing that I saw this morning that I probably talk about before I go much farther is, I don't know if you guys saw this report out of all places, the World Socialist Workers website, so WSWS.org, about how a significant number of intelligence agents or former intelligence agents, U.S. intelligence agents, are running for Congress as Democrats. And that's something like 42 out of the 110 seats that the Democrats are actively contesting in the House are being filled by people who are either recently fired by Trump or who feel strongly about pushing the intelligence community's perspective in Congress, i.e., if you can't win and beat Trump at the information war, then you'll beat him at the legislative level. To me, this sounds like pure and utter desperation, because it just sounds to me like Trump is actually winning at controlling the narrative coming out of the intelligence services that are working against him. Remember that I make a distinction between the deep state and the shadow government, where the deep state is really mostly the military-industrial complex and the attendant effects thereof, and then the shadow government is more the intelligence agencies plus the media and the financial workers behind the scenes. Not to say that the financial workers behind the scenes aren't implicated in both factions, but there is it's kind of a fundamental difference between the two, because it's two different wars that you're fighting. You're in one respect, you're fighting the military-industrial complex and kind of foreign policy, and on the other hand, you're kind of fighting domestic policy, ensuring that nothing changes at an institutional level. And they're all kind of intertwined. It's all a very internecine thing, but they are, I think, fundamentally different. All right, so I just find that very interesting. I find it both desperate, a sign of desperation, but also at the same time very disturbing, right? Because we are moving into a phase here where, for this election cycle, I really do fundamentally believe that the shadow government and the George Soroses and the NGOs and all of those guys are, and in hand with the intelligence communities, are going to attempt to a hostile takeover of Congress via every underhanded tactic that you can think of, including multiple false flags, a summer of induced violence at various events. They're activating and now arming Antifa in a way that should disturb everybody. Let's see. And then on top of that, there's going to be tremendous, massive voter fraud in every heavily contested district. And the voter fraud will not come in the form of Diebold machines. Well, it may, but the big one is really, it's coming at the early voting level, and it's coming at the stuffing the ballot box via postal votes that are mail-in votes that are, not as easily checked. and not as easily verified. And knowing that we've seen reports of stacks of quote unquote mail-in postal ballots, being filled out by supervisor of election workers in Broward County and then shoved through the Diebold machines, and they say, hey, look, we got to count. That's the kind of thing that's going to happen. And don't kid yourselves, because you're watching. If you look at the electoral map, and we're starting to get some reports out now of census projections. I was looking at this stuff over the weekend. I was looking at 270 to win, and I was looking at the latest projections from the statistics service, that arm of the government that actually does this. I can't remember the name of it, but it looks like you're going to see Texas could easily gain 3 electoral votes, and Florida could easily gain 2 electoral votes. And so it's going to be very important for them to try and turn one of those 2 states blue permanently in order to create a Democratic blue wall. Because no matter, even with states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and in Illinois losing electoral votes, and possibly even California may lose one, by the way. And they're now finally starting to handicap that. And I think, knowing what I've seen in terms of the migration rates over the last year or so, it looks like California will probably lose that electoral vote come the 2020 census. I don't even think that's much of a stretch at this point. So the electoral college map is going to fundamentally change, and if this reworking of illegal immigration does not come to pass, we're going to see it's going to be it could get much harder for Trump to get reelected if he's not successful on that front. I don't think he's not going to be successful. I think he's going to be successful, and I think he's going to win in a walk in 28. His guys are going to win in a walk in 2018, and I think he's going to win in a walk in 2020. If he's running against Joe Biden, please, you can't lose against Pedo Joe. I'm sorry, you just can't. I mean, who's going to vote for him? Amy Poehler? Screw her. She's one vote. But it's funny to see how things are shaking out. It's interesting. Alabama is projected to lose one. California may lose one. Oregon's going to probably pick up one. Montana might actually go back to having 2 congressional candidates. And Rhode Island looks like it's in terminal decline and is going to be down to 1. West Virginia is going to lose 1. Ohio is going to lose 1. Pennsylvania is going to lose 1. Illinois may lose 2. Texas is going to gain 3. Colorado is going to gain 1. Arizona is going to gain 1. Florida is going to gain 2, possibly 3. North Carolina is going to gain. So, that shift towards the Atlantic coast or the Gulf Coast is coming. It's, and Trump's tax plan, as I said right after it was signed, Trump's tax plan enshrines as economic incentive for this demographic shift to intensify over the next couple of years. Now, whether it'll be enough to more radically change the electoral map for the 2020 election is only, we'll have to see. We need to change so that the census doesn't count non-citizens for electoral power. Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, I mean, that would be really nice, wouldn't it? Now you know why California has 55 votes when it really shouldn't. So I also find it very disturbing, and I saw the report over the weekend that the Mexican president is in California lobbying and campaigning for Mexican citizens who vote here, and then to go back home and vote for him to vote against Trump. This is insane. If there's one thing that tells you what's wrong with our current immigration policy and this current structure of the way the Democrats want things done, it's that. I mean, seriously. So Donald Trump Jr. can't take a meeting with a honeypot Russian lawyer, and the Mexican president can campaign on U.S. soil. That Trump's transition team can't even talk to and begin to build bridges with their Russian counterparts. but Obama can go overseas and exhort people to vote a particular way. It's the level of hypocrisy is so insane. It's fundamentally unbelievable, and I think it's not just, I was talking about this in the latest issue of the newsletter. I think this kind of blatant unfairness in terms of how the narrative is constructed is fundamentally un-American, and most people get that. They just understand that at a kind of visceral level, and I think the backlash against this is going to be epic. And seriously, if the Democrats think that they can win on gun control and Russiagate, I think that they're sadly mistaken. They may be able to fundraise on gun control, but they're not going to be able to win on gun control, because seriously, Obama was the best seller of guns in the history of this country. Every time they call for gun control, I want to go long gun stocks. So, it's not tough, because sales always go through the roof. Smith & Wesson, Armalite, Bushmaster, it doesn't matter. So I was talking with a guy last night on steemit, one of the curators of the Information War channel, which if you guys don't follow Information War over on steemit.com, you really should. It's a great channel. I post there. I'll post all my stuff over there as well. And if you're not on steemit, you need to be. So, and we were discussing a variety of things, including that. And he's a younger guy. And it was interesting how he became a gun owner simply because Obama was threatening to ban AR-15s. And so I just find it really, really funny. So I'm just trying to get an idea of what YouTube is trying to tell me about my stream health. So, all right, this looks like a good place to stop. I think I've covered what I wanted to cover. So going forward here, watch to see how, if Matteo Salvini becomes Prime Minister of Italy, watch to see how he approaches Russian sanctions, how his finance minister approaches this subject, whether or not they really do try and push Germany to lower the sanctions or break with U.S. policy on this. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because this deal is important in helping to establish strong relations between very important players in the fight against, globalist Gary and the Goldman machine, for lack of a better term. All right, you guys have a great afternoon. I'll be on tonight on Periscope at 8 o'clock, my normal time. I'm sure we'll talk about this and a variety of other things as well. We just wanted to stop in this morning and give my thoughts on this one. All right, you guys take care. You have a great afternoon. Keep your stick on the ice.